She was fired from the ER until a special Navy SEAL Forces commander asked, "Where is my nurse?" The night shift at Harborview Medical Center had already been long before the shouting started. Monitors beeped steadily, stretchers rolled down fluorescent hallways, and exhausted nurses moved from room to room trying to keep up with the endless stream of emergencies. Sarah Mitchell stood at the nurses' station finishing a chart, her dark hair tied back, eyes tired but focused. She had been on her feet for 11 hours and still moved with calm precision that came from years of experience in trauma care. A young intern hurried past carrying lab results, while two paramedics pushed a patient through the ER doors shouting vital signs. Chaos was normal here, but tonight something felt different. Across the room, Dr. Keller stormed toward the desk, his face red with anger. Everyone in the ER knew that look. Sarah looked up just as he slammed a clipboard on the counter. "Mitchell, my office, now." Conversations around the station went quiet. Sarah calmly placed her pen down. "Is something wrong?" Keller didn't answer. He just turned and walked toward the glass office near the trauma rooms. Sarah followed without arguing. Inside the office, Keller closed the door hard enough to make the glass shake. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. Sarah folded her arms calmly. "You'll need to be more specific." Keller picked up a chart and waved it in the air. "Patient in trauma 3, you overrode my medication order." Sarah nodded once. "Yes." "You don't override a doctor's order." Her voice remained steady. "The dosage you prescribed would have stopped his breathing." Keller scoffed. "You're a nurse, not a physician." "I've worked trauma for 12 years. Keller leaned closer. "And tonight, you stepped out of line." Sarah didn't raise her voice. "I stepped in before a patient died." Outside the office, several nurses pretended to focus on their work while listening through the glass. Keller's voice rose. "You embarrassed me in front of my staff." Sarah met his glare. "Your patient is alive." Keller's hand slammed the desk. "You're fired." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Sarah blinked once, but didn't argue. "Effective immediately." Keller pointed toward the hallway. "Turn in your badge and leave." For a moment, the ER seemed to pause. Sarah slowly removed the badge clipped to her scrubs and placed it on the desk. Keller grabbed it without another word. She walked out of the office while the staff watched in stunned silence. Nurse Olivia whispered as Sarah approached the desk. "What happened?" Sarah shrugged lightly. "Disagreement." Olivia looked worried. "You saved that patient." Sarah picked up her bag. "Sometimes that's not the part people remember." She walked toward the exit without looking back. Outside the hospital, the night air felt cold and quiet compared to the chaos inside. Sarah stepped down the concrete stairs and sat on the bench near the ambulance bay. For the first time that night, she allowed herself a long breath. Losing her job should have felt devastating, but strangely, she felt calm. She had done what she believed was right. The distant sound of sirens echoed through the city streets as another ambulance approached. The vehicle backed into the emergency bay moments later, lights flashing against the hospital walls. Paramedics jumped out quickly and opened the rear doors. One of them shouted toward the entrance, "Multiple trauma patient, gunshot wounds." Sarah instinctively stood up, her training pulling her forward before she even thought about it. The ER doors burst open and staff rushed outside with a gurney. Sarah watched as they wheeled the patient inside. She started to follow automatically before remembering she no longer worked there. She stopped at the doorway. Through the glass, she could see the chaos begin again. Doctors shouting orders, nurses moving quickly around the stretcher. Then suddenly someone yelled, "Where's Mitchell?" Sarah froze. Inside the trauma bay, Dr. Keller barked commands while trying to stabilize the bleeding patient. The paramedic spoke urgently. "This guy's military, special operations. They said to get him to Harborview because of your trauma nurse, Mitchell." Keller frowned. "She's not here." The paramedic shook his head. They were specific, said she saved their commander once before. Keller's expression darkened. She doesn't work here anymore. Inside the room, the patient's heart monitor beeped rapidly. Another doctor said quietly, "We're losing him." Keller snapped back, "Then work faster." Outside the door, Sarah hesitated only a second before pushing it open and stepping inside. Several staff members turned in surprise. Olivia looked relieved. "Sarah!" Keller's eyes narrowed. "You're not employed here." Sarah walked toward the trauma bed. "What's the injury?" Keller stepped in front of her. "You need to leave." The patient suddenly gasped for air, blood soaking through the bandages across his chest. One of the nurses said quietly, "He's crashing." Sarah looked directly at Keller. 30 seconds. Keller hesitated. The room was silent except for the frantic beeping of the monitor. Finally, he stepped aside. Sarah moved to the bedside instantly, her calm focus returning as if she had never left. "Clamp here," she instructed one nurse. "More suction." Her hands moved quickly, adjusting tubes and pressure points with practiced precision. The bleeding slowed slightly. The patient's breathing stabilized. Olivia whispered in disbelief, "How did you see that?" Sarah didn't answer. She was already working the next step of the procedure. 10 minutes later, the trauma team stepped back as the patient's vitals steadied. The monitor now beeped with a strong rhythm. Keller stared at the screen, stunned. Just then, the ER doors burst open again. Several men in tactical jackets rushed inside. Their posture and presence made it clear they weren't ordinary visitors. One of them stepped forward, tall, broad shoulders, eyes scanning the room with sharp focus. A hospital security guard tried to intercept them. "Sir, you can't." The man flashed a military identification badge so quickly the guard stepped aside instantly. He walked directly toward the trauma bay. Keller frowned. "Who are you?" The man ignored his question and looked around the room. His voice was calm but commanding. "Where is my nurse?" No one answered. His eyes moved across the staff until they landed on Sarah standing beside the bed. His serious expression softened slightly. "There you are." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Commander Blake?" Several doctors exchanged confused looks. Keller asked cautiously, "You know this man?" Blake stepped forward and extended his hand toward Sarah. "This woman saved my life 2 years ago." The room fell silent. Keller glanced between them. "What?" Blake nodded toward the patient on the bed. "And now she just saved one of my team." He looked around the ER staff. "I specifically ordered my men to bring wounded here because of her." Keller's voice was tight. "She no longer works here." Blake's expression changed instantly. The calm professionalism hardened into something colder. "Explain." Keller shifted uncomfortably. "She was dismissed earlier tonight." Blake raised an eyebrow. "Dismissed?" No one spoke. Finally, Olivia muttered quietly, "For correcting a medication order." Blake turned slowly back toward Keller. "You fired the best trauma nurse in this hospital because she prevented a mistake?" Keller tried to respond, but the words didn't come easily. Blake stepped closer, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Doctor, men under my command operate in places where seconds decide life or death." He gestured toward Sarah. "People like her are the reason some of us make it home." The entire ER staff stood silently. Blake looked at Sarah again. "If they don't want you here, I know a military medical program that would recruit you in about 5 minutes. Keller suddenly spoke. "That won't be necessary." Blake looked back at him. Keller cleared his throat. "Mitchell, your termination is rescinded." Sarah raised her eyebrow slightly. Keller continued quickly. "Effective immediately." Blake smiled faintly. "Good decision." The room slowly returned to motion as the trauma team resumed their work, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Just an hour earlier, Sarah Mitchell had walked out of the ER unemployed. Now the entire hospital understood something they hadn't realized before. The quiet nurse they had taken for granted was the reason a Navy SEAL commander trusted this hospital with his life.